What's good, folks? Family, friends, loved ones, enemies, frenemies, wizards, witches, muggles, mudbloods, people. Middle Earth to another episode of Disguise Coverage, the only podcast in existence that gives you an equal amount of blueberries in each muffin. I am your host, Anthony Prohaska. Find me on Twitter at pro__ant. That's pro two underscores ANT. This podcast and this show is, of course, sponsored by the best pizza, hands down, in Buffalo, New York. That is One Pie Pizza. You can find their online menu in the episode show notes, whether here on YouTube or anywhere on the podcasting apps or platforms. I genuinely mean that. They are the best in Buffalo. Delicious cup of char pepperoni, fantastic cheese to sauce ratio, sweet sauce pie. They make their own homemade blue cheese. They are phenomenal. Go get yourself some One Pie Pizza, especially if you're still feeling a bit down or a bit sad after the way the season ended for the Buffalo Bills. And if you want to give yourself a quick little pick-me-up, go get some One Pie Pizza. In tonight's episode of Disguise Coverage, as the title indicates, we're going to be looking at one of the top, I was going to say one of the top priorities, but it might be the top offseason priority right now for the Buffalo Bills, and that's the offensive line. We're going to dive into their performance as a group in 2022, their performance from an individual perspective in 2022. We're going to be taking a look at some advanced metrics. We're going to be taking a look at a couple game film clips. I didn't want to go too hard with it and really kind of, make it a snuff film of sorts and just throw out horrible plays and just get too much into the weeds with it. Vito saying, hey, what's up, Vito? I appreciate you stopping by. Thank you very much for being here. Yeah, we're going to dive into this offensive line, a group that, I'm annoyed at having this conversation because I feel like I was in a very similar spot last year with this Bills offensive line. Hi, Andrew. Welcome. In terms of having questions about this group, in terms of having some concerns and wondering what their floor was as a group, what their ceiling was as a group, especially for, guys like Spencer Brown coming into year two. I had a lot of thoughts in my mind when it came to this group. And I feel like we've gone forward, obviously, from 2022 to the 2023 offseason. And here we are having what sounds like and feels like a similar conversation based on how the Bills offensive line performed in 2022. And we're going to talk about some options they have going forward. Again, really diagramming and diagnosing anything and everything from the Bills offensive line from this past season on a group level, on an individual level. As always on this show, any questions, thoughts, comments, concerns, philosophies, ideologies, maxims, theorems, whatever you folks have, feel free to throw it up into the chat. I like to bring up as many comments as possible and make this as engaging as possible. I see you folks, going back with each other in the chat and asking questions to me and just going back and forth with myself. I like to make it as interactive for everyone as possible. Of course, super chats get priority. One, because I respect the monetary donation. Two, the color attracts my eyes and allows me to kind of pick that up and distracts me from my notes. So any thoughts, questions, comments, concerns, whatever you got, throw it up into the chat, especially for an issue like this. I know the offensive line is a somewhat of a hot button topic of conversation for Bills Mafia. So we'll get into the weeds as needed here on the show. This is fantastic from RJ. I also see what your comment is, but I want to grab this comment first from AJ. So AJ is new to Cover One. He's an intern for us, and he was down in Mobile, Alabama with us last week. And AJ says, listening to old Kanye and eating some French fries. Can't wait for today! Exclamation point. I just want to put this out there for everyone who knows, because someone might see the comment and be like, what does this mean? So there was a lot of, different hip hop music playing at different bars and restaurants that we were going to. And at one point, Hypnotized by Biggie came on. And I just asked AJ, because AJ's like 22, and I just asked AJ if he knew who sung this song, and he did not know. So the kind of music that he listened to became an interest for myself and other members of the team. And he mentioned a lot of current rappers that he listens to. And then just to throw it in there for us, he was like, oh, I also like a lot of like Kanye, but old Kanye. And you could tell that he just made it up. He did not listen to old Kanye. And I knew it, and I didn't want to call him on it. And later, when it was just me and him, he admitted that he does not listen to old Kanye. And then the next night, he stole one of my French fries at dinner. I just want to make that known. I don't mean to put you on blast, AJ, but, you just did not perform to expectations. But no, seriously, AJ was fantastic. We're very excited to have him on the team. Comment here from RJ. This news just broke. Bills hired Al Holcomb as a senior defensive assistant. And then RJ says, don't even know what that role is, with the laughing emoji. Yeah, I know he worked with Sean McDermott. I didn't dive into it. I saw it pop up on Twitter's been a mess today and this afternoon and this evening. I don't know what's going on, but I saw it pop up on my feed. This is funny from Jared. Jared says that AJ sounds like a winner. No, AJ is fantastic in all seriousness. Yeah, I don't know if it's like a buddy helping out a buddy or what his role is going to be or how he fits in, or if it's just, another guy adding input or a pair of eyes, or if he'll have a specific role. Maybe it's a niche role, maybe it's large scale, wide net. Obviously, we'll find out in potentially the coming days, but obviously as we move forward. But very interesting, kind of just announcing it at like a 6:40 on a Wednesday evening Eastern time is a little weird, but we'll see what happens. And yeah, RJ says he assisted Steve Wilkes last year. Yes, I believe he was with him in Carolina when Wilkes was interim. I believe he also may have worked with him previously. I haven't dove into too much of the track record, just because I saw it drop right before we went live. But it'll be something interesting to note, especially for a group that in the Buffalo Bills defense that has come under fire a little bit from a coaching staff perspective in terms of Leslie Frazier and Eric Washington and what their identity is, and Sean McDermott's defense and trying to change things or make things better or running it all back, yada, yada. Tremaine Edmonds, Jordan Poyer, a whole bunch of consternation when it comes to the defense. So very interesting to see them, add a senior defensive assistant that has ties to Sean McDermott. So we'll see what that means and see what that brings. Let's dive into the meat of this episode, the crux of this episode, addressing the Buffalo Bills offensive line. Actually, real quick, before we do, folks that are in here, I know we're on the slow part of the offseason, but if you are in here, whether you're watching live or watching post live, please drop a like on this video if you feel it worthy. It goes a long way towards helping myself and the entire team to track and trend in front of more eyes and ears. So please and thank you. If you're watching here on YouTube, please drop a like on this video. If you were listening on any one of the podcasting apps or platforms, that's cool too. Please rate and review. No matter where you are, audio, YouTube, please subscribe to Disguise Coverage and to Cover One as a whole. Appreciate you folks. Let's get into it. A somewhat, I don't want to say controversial because that's not the right word, but I think earlier, like a hot button issue when it comes to the Buffalo Bills offensive line, a grouping that, for me at least, and I think more people have come around to this idea, or maybe this isn't a thought that was necessarily unique to me at any point of, the season or the off season. I just felt like so many of the issues for this Bills offense had some sort of relation to the offensive line, where the offensive line was some sort of source point or patient zero for problems that happened for this Bills offense. I like this comment here from Riemann saying, I hit the like button and I also like the show in real life. That's fantastic. That's a double like. I appreciate you. Thank you for being here and thank you for the like. There were just times where, I think from a basic level, knowing how much is put onto Josh Allen's shoulders and watching Josh Allen have to constantly evade pressure these last several years, but especially this past season, and just everything that's heaped onto his shoulders with a new offensive coordinator and changes in some pieces in the weaponry on offense, having the inconsistencies that the Bills offensive line had this year were easy to spot. They were readily apparent. You got guys getting beat quickly or just in ways that are very unbecoming of a professional NFL lineman. And we saw that starting in the beginning of the year, and we saw that carry on through the end of the regular season and then culminating in a game where the Bills offensive line really looked outclassed against the Cincinnati Bengals, just unable to generate push, unable to reestablish the line of scrimmage in the run game, unable to hold up consistently in pass protection. They just seemed very leaky throughout the entire game. It was, a comment here coming in that the offensive line was the biggest issue with this team. I'm kind of on board with that, or at the very least, it's in that Rolodex of, biggest issues with the team in 2022. Roy coming in and saying the O-line was not good, but Josh not having reliable weapons didn't help either. I agree. There's a multitude of, you got the offensive line issues, you got some weapons issues, you got some Josh Allen issues in terms of his accuracy, ball placement, and decision-making. You've got some Ken Dorsey issues. It's a culmination of football lives in the gray. That's what makes it so hard to succeed. That's why it's a chess match week in and week out and season to season. Very rarely is anything ever one person or one group's fault. Everything is interconnected. But again, I think a lot of points can be traced to the offensive line in a variety of ways. Silas, I appreciate you being here. Thank you very much for your presence and also for your super chat. Silas says, are we discussing offensive line prospects, free agent targets? So in this episode, we're going to be diving into the performance of the Bills O-line from 2022, talking about what needs to change going forward. And I'm going to mention several offensive line prospects, yes, especially after being in Mobile last week for the Senior Bowl. I had a good firsthand look at several offensive line prospects that look to be drafted somewhere in the first round, a second round, maybe third. And that's not even taking into account all the underclassmen that are coming out. But yes, we will be talking about some offensive line prospects in the back end of this draft. John comes in and says, I keep hearing they may be replacing the whole right side of the offensive line in the draft. And RJ's comment as well, saying it felt like every offensive lineman this year had their worst year to date, except for maybe Mitch Morse, who was banged up literally all year. He still wore a wrap on the elbow during the Pro Bowl. That's a piece that we're going to talk about as well. The Bills' offensive line, and my issue with them as a whole is, again, we got some tape, we got some metrics to go through. On the whole, like when you average it out, the Bills' offensive line is average to below average. At times they play above average, but when you average it all out as a group, they're not awful. The problem is, one, that being average to below average is not ideal. But more importantly, point two, the Bills' O-line has rotated the role of who is going to be a vulnerability from play to play. One snap, Spencer Brown gets beat quickly. On another snap, it's Rodger Saffold. Then it's Ryan Bates. Then it's Dion Dawkins. And sometimes it's Mitch Morse. There's no one singular player who is getting beat rep after rep. Yes, there are certain offensive linemen who tend to get beat more than others for the Buffalo Bills, but they each wear and share that hat of vulnerability. And I keep having the idea in my head of if the Buffalo Bills offensive line were a dam, there's no one giant hole in the dam, but there's several cracks of varying sizes. And you never know which one is going to leak, when it's going to leak, and how much water is going to get through. But you do know that at some point, a leak will happen. And sometimes it'll just be one, sometimes it'll be two leaks at a time, sometimes more, sometimes none. The amount of water that gets through will vary. And it's that variability and that variance and that level of uncertainty that I think from rep to rep is a significant hindrance to the Bills offense. There's a cohesion for this group in terms of their success, but there's also, again, cohesion in terms of the failure. Like if that makes sense for everyone, you just get from play to play someone getting beat differently. And I think that's part of what makes the way forward somewhat tricky this offseason, because there's not one cure-all. There's not like, okay, here's the big weak spot. Here's the glaring weak spot. Here's the huge hole. Let's fix this. Boom, boom. We're good to go. You could upgrade a lot on this offensive line. I think there's two main points, but as a whole, this offensive line, again, we're going to take a look at some advanced metrics as we go forward here. This wasn't the worst offensive line in football. They weren't terrible. They did struggle against elite or top tier defensive lines or individual players, which is something we've seen for these last several years, their inability to handle the premier guys. And not that anybody necessarily can. That's why premier edge rushers and defensive tackles are premier edge rushers and defensive tackles. They win almost all the time, no matter what. Again, relatively. There's a reason they're top guys. There's a reason they're premier. They win a lot, but you still have to provide some sort of resistance, some semblance of resistance if you are an offensive lineman going up against top tier dudes. And we just saw a lack of resistance at times across this entire line. And again, this leads into the conversation for this offseason, because the Bills could stand to upgrade and stabilize several positions on the offensive line. And it would be great if they could land a blue chip top tier talent, but one, that's hard to do. It's not necessarily realistic. And what they need, combined with what they can do realistically, is just to reinforce the stability and consistency of this offensive line. I'm going to talk about some things they can do again in the back end of this episode, especially from a draft perspective. There's several offensive linemen I really, really, really like coming out of this college football season. I've already started grinding the tape a bit on prospects. And then again, seeing a lot of guys firsthand at the Senior Bowl last week was absolutely tremendous. So we are going to dive into that piece. But first, we're going to start. Oh, thank you, Silas. I appreciate you recognizing the analogy. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Ooh, I like this one. Have we considered the obvious move of Edmonds to right tackle? Potentially, but that would ruin the idea of Tremaine Edmonds moving to edge and being the dominant edge rusher. For those of you who follow me on Twitter, That's a running joke that I love and I continue to go with over and over and over. Oh, I like this comment from Roy. Roy saying, I watch absolutely no college football. So now we're into the part of the offseason where I have to rely on Cover One for my education. Appreciate you, Roy. You always got to be careful who you rely on and what you look to. You don't want to get misled in any way. So appreciate you having faith in myself or whoever from the brand that you choose to put your faith into. Let's look at the offensive line individually. That's what we're going to start with. So we're going to look at all the position groups. I've got some graphics. I'm going to bring one up in a minute, read some thoughts and pieces on that. And one piece I wanted to go with is I'm going to use Sports Info Solutions for some advanced metrics in this one. Again, we're going to look at some film towards the back end as well. So I've got some advanced metrics from Sports Info Solutions and some advanced metrics from Pro Football Focus. Now, the numbers that we're going to see from Pro Football Focus, they are not grades. I do not use the Pro Football Focus grades. I think they're too arbitrary, but PFF is very good for a lot of advanced metrics, their efficiency ratings, and the way they're able to apply quantitative data in a lot of areas, offensively and defensively, to teams, to position groups, to individuals. And that's why I kind of hung my hat on for this episode. So without further ado, we're going to start to talk about some numbers. So again, let's bring up this graphic over, y'all. So the first one here, I'll pull down the banner on the top there so you folks can see. So PFF efficiency score. So for offensive linemen, basically what this is it measures pressures allowed on a per snap basis weighted towards sacks allowed. And I filtered some pieces because, again, sample size is important. So if you see there on the left side, we're going left to right. There were 88 offensive tackles that had at least 20% of pass protection snaps in 2022. This is regular season and postseason. Tristan Wirfs of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, phenomenal right tackle. He had the highest PFF efficiency score at 99.1. So again, Wirfs was first at 99.1, just to have that number in your head for the sake of, when I read these other numbers for Brown and Dawkins, you have some kind of measuring stick. And again, 88 offensive tackles who qualified here. So of those 88 offensive tackles, Spencer Brown was tied for 99th in efficiency. Or I'm sorry, was tied for 69th. Ooh, that would have been even worse. That's impossible, 99th out of 88. So of those 88 offensive tackles, Spencer Brown was tied for 69th out of 88 with a score of 95.6. If you put him into all of the offensive linemen who qualified, there was 206 offensive linemen, so tackles, guards, centers, with at least 20% of pass protection snaps in 2022. Of those 206 offensive linemen, Spencer Brown is tied for 180th in pass blocking efficiency in true pass sets. Those true pass sets, for those who don't know, those are ones without screens. They are non-play action. They take longer than 2 seconds to throw. They're not short dropbacks. It's basically removing certain variable aspects to the pass protection rep. So again, true pass pro sets, regular pass pro and pass efficiency, you've got everything included. Short dropbacks, long time to throw, anything and everything. With true pass sets, you are removing play action. You are removing screens. You are removing short dropbacks and several other areas there. So it gives you, again, a truer measure. He was 180th, tied out of the 206 offensive linemen in true pass sets. And then just for tackles, he was 70th. Amongst those 88 tackles. Dion Dawkins, he's on the far right there, that little column. For just regular pass efficiency for PFF, he was 31st out of the 88 offensive tackles with a score of 97. And then of the 88 tackles with at least 20% of pass protection snaps, he was 24th in efficiency in true pass sets. Tristan Wirfs was first again in true pass sets with another score of 99.1. So it didn't matter if it was a true pass set or anything and everything. Tristan Wirfs had a phenomenal year if you're looking at that piece. But those true pass sets, again, are telling to a degree, as are just the numbers as a whole. And I knew Spencer Brown struggled. You could see it on tape. You could see it in the broadcast. Like, you didn't necessarily need the game film to understand that. But looking at the metrics, he was further down than I even considered or thought for myself. Like, seeing him, again, just regular pass blocking efficiency, seeing him 69th out of the 88 qualifying tackles is extremely low. And again, some of that is tied to the injuries he had in the offseason, the injuries he's had during the year. That's a piece I really want to start with for Spencer Brown. You've got somebody who was already raw coming out of college. You've got somebody who, I'll pull down the graphic for a minute and put it back up in a sec. You've got somebody in Spencer Brown who, was playing 8-on-8 or 9-man football in high school. He didn't come from an area where they played full 11-on-11. And then he goes to the University of Northern Iowa. And then he has the COVID opt-out year. He's still very green. He's still very raw. He's a project. His timeline got accelerated given what's happened across the offensive line as a whole. He's still learning how to play right tackle on the fly, and he's learning how to do that in the NFL. He still has a tremendously high ceiling, so I don't want to just completely, dump on a guy. He still has that high ceiling, and there are several pieces that have worked against him. And then he has the injuries this past offseason. He incurs some injuries during the season. I think that impacted his athleticism. And, for a guy who was already relying on his athleticism instead of technique and experience, any hindrance to being able to use that athleticism is going to be a problem. And we saw the roller coaster ride that was and is Spencer Brown again this year. And that's the big thing for me with Spencer Brown. It's that roller coaster. It's the mercurial performances. On one snap, you see the athleticism. You see him climb to the second level or make a block out in space or just demolish somebody with pace or force and power and violence. Like, you see the pieces that you're like, oh, like, that dude's a tremendous athlete. Look at him move. This could really be something here. And sometimes, from a technical standpoint, he's okay. Like, his feet are moving in unison with his hands and he's got proper balance. And, sometimes he'll alternate. Sometimes he'll get first touch and sometimes he'll wait and play games. Like, and you're like, okay, like, this guy's starting to put it together a little bit. And then there's reps where he just gets beat within the blink of an eye. And when he gets beat, it's ugly. It's rough. It'll happen inside. It'll happen on the outside. He'll get beat sometimes like right through the chest with a bull rush or some speed to power. You'll see him have improper hand placement and lose balance and lose leverage. Like, he'll just get a hand chop and almost completely fall on his face and guys are going right around him. There's little consistency and there's so much variance with Spencer Brown. It's either, and again, that ties to my point earlier of, it's not necessarily landing blue chip or top tier guys on the offensive line, which would be great if the Bills could do that, but that isn't the most realistic thing. They just need more stability and consistency. And I think Spencer Brown is a good microcosm of that. He's got reps where you're like, sweet, look at Spencer Brown. And then he's got reps where you're like, oh God, look at Spencer Brown. And it's that roller coaster. It's that mercurial performance, which again, I'm not giving him a pass at all. I think that's somewhat understandable given his experience level in terms of his history, what he played in high school, where he played in college, the injuries that he's had so far in this league. But the issue is being understanding to his development process and his trajectory isn't necessarily the best thing for this offensive line. I had hope for Spencer Brown in year 2 this past year. And yes, I know the injuries presented variables. They need more stability from that right tackle position. I've seen some people talk about, drafting a rookie won't help that. You're going to have more variance. There's going to be more variability. I think there's several rookies from a tackle perspective in this draft that, especially in rounds 1 and 2, maybe even potentially in round 3, depending on who falls down there and shakes down there, that can offer you reasonably high levels of upside while also potentially giving you an improved floor for 2023. That's the big piece. This Bills offensive line, in a perfect world, in an ideal world, they're like a top 10 unit or a top 5 unit. And you've got a great group who can protect Josh Allen, who can allow you to run the football and allow you to really truly take advantage of the gifts and talent that is Josh Allen, right? But again, that's not always realistic. And I don't necessarily even think that's an absolute must. You just need them to not be awful. You just need them to not be a vulnerability. You just need them to not be deficient. That's been the biggest problem for this Bills offensive line is, again, when they get beat, it's not like, yeah, it took them like 2.5 or 3 seconds to get beat. It's no, they get beat in like a half a second to a second. Spencer Brown is the biggest microcosm of that, an example of that. But again, it's happened to Saffold, it's happened to Dawkins, it's happened to Bates, it's happened to Morse a couple times who had a good year from a metric perspective and on some tape. They just get beat so quickly. And that's not unique to the Buffalo Bills, but it happens in key moments. It happens more when they play top tier or elite defensive lines, which again is not unique to the Buffalo Bills, but you need more consistency and stability in that arena. And Spencer Brown his ups and downs really highlight that piece. And again, I'll pull it up just for those who just joined, or, just wanted to wrap this piece up. So again, of the 88 offensive tackles with at least 20% of pass protection snaps in 2022, Spencer Brown was tied for 69th out of those 88 in his efficiency score. And of the 206 offensive linemen with at least 20% of pass protection snaps, Spencer Brown is tied for 180th in pass block efficiency in true pass sets. Again, true pass block sets are the ones that exclude screens, exclude play action, exclude short dropbacks, and kind of give you more of a I don't want to say realistic, but more of an accurate piece together. Again, you're throwing out screens, you're throwing out play action, you're throwing out rollouts, you're adding that time to throw piece. Also, it's going to be 4 or more rushers. So you're adding in all those pieces. Again, one more time for true pass sets, because I'm going to talk about these as we go forward with the slides. True pass set, no play action, no screen, no rollout, time to throw between 2 and 4 seconds, and with 4 or more rushers. And you see where Spencer Brown ranks for that piece, especially in comparison with Dion Dawkins, right? Even if you're not looking at true pass sets, Spencer Brown tied for 69th in overall efficiency. Dion Dawkins is at 31st, a big discrepancy between your left tackle and your right tackle. And then again, in true pass sets, amongst just the tackles, Spencer Brown is 70th, Dion Dawkins is 24th. So again, a large disparity between your two tackles, which isn't necessarily the most ideal piece and the most ideal thing. So let's grab some comments here from you folks while we are here. Grabbing this comment here from Jason. Jason says, Brown seems too slow in pass protection, and I feel we don't run the ball enough to take advantage of his skills in the run game to offset the inconsistent pass protection. This Bills team is a pass-first team. I would like more effectiveness in the running game, and also I'm at a point where I'd like more volume in the run game. I think the NFL and the nature of the offense-defense relationship is the pendulum starting to swing back a little bit, and the run game is becoming, more trendy and more sexy now in terms of what you need. And it's not just zone run, gap scheme runs are becoming more of a thing. And I'm not just saying that because I predicted it about a year and a half ago, and I'm very excited that that prediction came true. But I think the Bills do need to run the ball more from a volume standpoint and also run better. I'm not saying, again, that it's got to be a 50-50 relationship or 55-45, but the Bills could help themselves a bit more by running the football more and getting that piece of the offense into rhythm. And yeah, with Brown, it is interesting for someone as athletic and as long and as bursty. He does get beat around the edge. And I think some of it is if you're not processing quickly, you're going to play slow physically. It doesn't matter if you run a 4.2 or a 4.3 40. If you can't play fast if you're not able to process quickly and efficiently. And I think sometimes he gets caught into his own head figuring out, like, okay, who am I picking up, in this situation? What's my responsibility? Okay, where should my feet be? Where should my hands be? And before you know it, he gets blown by. And then you add it up with the times where maybe he's not overthinking. It's just, pure misexecution or mistechnique. He will get beat. He will get beat quickly. Jason says the real question is, have you decided what house you're going to pick in Hogwarts Legacy? I haven't played it yet. I'm a Slytherin guy, though. Like, if I had to align myself, I'd be a Slytherin guy. Appreciate the Ravenclaw potential association, but I am I'm a Slytherin guy. I hope that doesn't really turn off anyone too much. Cardboard Max coming from the top rope at the elbow, saying Spencer Brown will shorten Josh Allen's career. Again, those numbers we looked at, huge discrepancy between where Dawkins finished in PFF's efficiency metrics and where Spencer Brown finished. And again, I don't think you look at that and just say, like, well, those numbers are wrong. When you look at it on the tape, I think it makes sense to a degree as well. Let's kick it to the inside a little bit. Let's look at the guards for the Buffalo Bills. So now, again, everything I'm filtering for is for 20% of pass protection snaps. You want to have at least a good sample size in that way. So for the tackles, we had 88 tackles that qualified. For the guards, we have 79. So 79 guards with at least 20% of pass protection snaps. Chris Lindstrom was first at 98.9. He had a good year. When you're looking where Rodger Saffold and Ryan Bates finished, you can see it there on the graphic. So Rodger Saffold, out of those 79 guards, was 50th in PFF's efficiency score. with a score of 97.1. And then if you're looking at true pass sets, again, we've talked about what those are, but just in case anyone is new into the episode, true pass sets are ones without play action, without a screen, without a rollout, with the time to throw being between 2 and 4 seconds, and with more than a 3-man rush. So in those scenarios, Saffold was tied for 47th. A little better, honestly, than I thought. Not great, still towards the bottom end of the spectrum, but closer to kind of middling for true pass sets, which isn't terrible. The score is significantly off, versus what Lindstrom finished with, leading the group in true pass sets, again, at a score of 98.6. So Lindstrom had a great year, whether you're looking at it overall or from a true pass set perspective. But Saffold comes in at 50th, 47th in true pass sets. Ryan Bates, on the other hand, tied for 34th overall in PFF efficiency score with a score of 97.5, and then tied for 26th in true pass sets. So again, not stellar, not top 10, but not awful. Ryan Bates was sufficient to sufficient plus. And I think that speaks to his year as well. He had some reps that were rough. Again, everybody on the Bills offensive line did at times this year. Bates struggled a bit against top tier guys. He struggled with Aaron Donald in week 1, but again, who doesn't? Struggled a bit at times against Hill and Reeder in that game against the Cincinnati Bengals, but those two are both studs. But not as big of a discrepancy between these two as I thought there was necessarily going to be from an advanced metric standpoint. Again, the one between Dawkins and Brown, I kind of assumed, but Saffold and Bates was closer than I initially thought. And then Rodger Saffold, he had some real miserable reps at times. I know everybody kind of has a couple of those ones from the Cincinnati game in their head. We're going to take a look at one of them on the back end of this episode, but from an advanced metric standpoint, not completely terrible. Also, with dealing with Rodger Saffold, and again, this isn't giving him a pass at all, but I think you kind of knew who you were getting in bed with, or should have known coming into the year. I talked about it when the Bills added Saffold. He was fine in the run game as a blocker. I would have liked him to be better. But I thought he would have some potential struggles in pass protection because of his age, because of his limited athleticism at this point. I thought you could game him up, and if you could try and make him work laterally and really test that agility and functional athleticism, you could give him problems, because at times it looked like he was moving, with cement feet or moving in quicksand, and teams did that. They gamed him up. They focused on him. They put edge rushers. The Bengals did it, taking Joseph Asai and lining him up on the inside over Rodger Saffold and showing a 5 down front and making every lineman have to account for somebody, which guaranteed that they could get Saffold matched up on Osai, because they knew if we take this bursty athletic guy and put him on Rodger Saffold, Saffold's going to lose. And so we saw that time and time again on tape. But again, the numbers weren't too terrible. And again, this is my thought with this offensive line group. And again, we're going to go into some numbers for the group as a whole. Even the guys that are at their worst, Spencer Brown's advanced metrics, like we've shown so far, were the worst significantly. And again, that speaks to his high variance and his mercurial play. Sometimes it's up here and it's great, and sometimes it's way down here and he looks like he shouldn't even be playing. And then Saffold was right behind him for me in terms of guys who I was most worried about. And going into this offseason, I do think you need an upgrade at right tackle, and I do think you need an upgrade at left guard, or guard in general, whether that means, I think Ryan Bates is fine. You could upgrade from Ryan Bates, but you could also do a lot worse than Ryan Bates. So whether you want Bates at right guard or Bates at left guard, and you're bringing in a new right guard, or you're bringing a new left guard in and keeping Bates at right, whatever, I do think you need a significant upgrade, maybe not significant, but upgrade in general for one of your guards and right tackle. At the very least, I think they need to bring in somebody to compete, somebody established, or a first round or second round offensive lineman like a Darnell Wright, who I really love. We're going to talk about a little bit later in this episode. You either need to bring somebody who is already an immediate upgrade over Spencer Brown, or bring in somebody who has a realistic shot to beat him, or at the very least compete with him. I think going into, again, they're going to have to address guard in general anyway. Saffold was on a 1-year deal, so, that's a hole and a spot you got to fill. But Brown, I think, it was a vulnerability at times, and I still have high hopes. I still think the ceiling is present, and I would like to see what he can bring and be without the injuries and with a full offseason under his belt. But I think at this point, we're still... it's a lot of hope that's baked into the trajectory and the projections for Spencer Brown. I think, you compare him with another high ceiling guy on the defensive side, like Greg Rousseau, Rousseau has shown legitimate incremental increases from, where he was in college to year one in the NFL, from year one to year two. So if you're making projections for him, I think they're a little more based in reality for a high ceiling guy like that. If you're doing the same for Brown or any projection for him, again, I really think they're more hope based. And with what we saw from this team this year, I don't think you can have a hope based plan. And with how mercurial he's been in his execution and his performance, the only way for me I'm going to feel comfortable if he's the starter again on day one is if whoever they bring in at guard is an absolute stud, to the point where Brown is the only potential vulnerability and you can kind of slide things to his side and protect him a little bit more. But given the Bills' cap situation and how this offseason is shaking out and who's potentially available, I don't necessarily see them bringing in a stud guard in order to kind of remedy that situation. So I do think they need upgrades and new blood in at right tackle and in at left guard. Bring up this comment here from Coach Chapman. He says, I believe Bates was solid, Dawkins was solid, and Morse was solid. Big, but weaknesses at left guard affects the left tackle and center. Weakness at right tackle affects right guard. Excellent point. That's actually one of my next points here on the notes. Like the pairings that you have impact everyone. And that was Rodger Saffold's veteran experience, I hoped would lead to more consistency on the left side of the line, playing between Dion, Dawkins, and Mitch Morse. And that was something that Mitch Morse talked about during minicamp or training camp, the communication of Rodger Saffold, the experience, their ability to play off one another and what that was bringing. I hope that would translate more to the regular season. Now, Rodger Saffold also, he had an injury that kept him out of camp, and offensive line, a big piece of it is chemistry, especially for, you take a basic thing like zone blocking, and one of the foundational elements of a zone blocking scheme are the double teams, and knowing who's going to leave the double team and when. A lot of that is based off of chemistry and feel, and you need to build that rapport with your partners and your peers. And the Bills offensive line did not have that in training camp and in the preseason, so I think that hindered them as well. So good point there from Coach Chapman. RJ says Bates at left guard. I think that fits him better. He looked really good at left guard last year. If you're subscribing to that model, you could move Ryan Bates back to left guard. You could draft an Osiris Torrance from Florida and put him in at right guard, or again, trying to sign a right guard. Could be that piece if you want to shuffle a little bit more. But even at right guard, I didn't think Bates was bad. I didn't think he was a liability. I didn't think he was a vulnerability. And again, the numbers speak to that for his performance as well. Again, 79 guards with at least 20% of pass protection snaps last year. Bates was tied for 34th in PFF's efficiency score. And in those true pass sets, he was tied for 26th. So middle of the road towards slightly above middle of the road, which again isn't ideal. You'd like everybody to be a plus matchup or a plus piece in an ideal world, or at least have one plus piece. But, sufficiency isn't necessarily a terrible thing. It's the problem is if sufficiency is your ceiling and you're pairing that with, some low lows, like we saw from other spots on the offensive line. What other... Oh, Coach Chapman, you're echoing a lot of things I said earlier. Brown only has 2 seasons of offensive tackle in college at the FCS level. He's really learning on the fly at the pro level, and what killed him was not getting to work with Cromer in the offseason. You're literally banging the drum for a lot of my points. So I brought this up because I just thought it was so spot on, not just because you agreed with me, because it almost mimicked a lot of what I said. Yeah, and again, he played. For those who don't know, he played 8-on-8 or 9-man football in high school. He was a tight end, I think a defensive end. So his experience at tackle is limited. His experience at tackle playing against higher caliber talent is further limited because he went to University of Northern Iowa. And again, he's learning how to play tackle on the fly in the NFL, similar to how Greg Rousseau is learning how to play edge on the fly in the NFL. So again, it's not an ideal situation. I think that has to be taken into account for his performance, but I don't think you can continue to bank on him being a solid starter in year 3 for 2023 on anything more than hope. Like if you're thinking, hey, Spencer Brown is going to be a solid piece of this offensive line in 2023, I would love that. But I think you're basing that more on hope and projection. Not saying that you are, Coach Chapman, but if someone is doing that, I think you are basing that more on hope and, pie in the sky type stuff than you are what you've seen, or you're banking on, you know what, I think if he's healthy, he's going to be great. And if you are, that's what your thought process is, that's fantastic. I still think that's more hope-based than anything. Some comments here. Ben Powers, Dalton Reisner, Jermaine Elemanor are all free agent names I'd be very interested. Is Jawan Taylor any good? There's a lot of good pieces potentially that are available in free agency. My biggest thing is cost. I really like Reisner. I like Ben Powers. I was looking at those names last week while I was at the Senior Bowl. I just don't know what the monetary cost is going to be. I think step one, you have to sign Tremaine Edmonds. Then you're trying to see what you can do with Jordan Poyer. I think the Bills have to finagle some cap pieces first and foremost before I can even wrap my head around potential free agents, which I will in the coming weeks. But I would be very happy with a Ben Powers coming in or a Dalton Reisner, those top end free agents. But again, based on how thin this free agent class is at that spot, I think those dudes have a good possibility of getting paid, and the higher probability of them getting paid means it's a lower probability of them coming to the Buffalo Bills. But you know. Second this notion, Coach Chapman, he says, Brown has the athleticism, size, length, and strength. It's all technique, which can be corrected and taught, but we need to bring in competition. That's the piece. I don't think Brown should be penciled in as the right tackle starter for 2023. You need to bring in legitimate competition. And if he beats him out, awesome. And, if he loses, that's not the end of the world. I also like the idea, this may seem foolish, I like the idea of Spencer Brown as the sixth offensive lineman, and because of his athleticism, I like the potential variability it adds if you're going to rock some play action, and maybe he's that actual sixth offensive lineman, but he functions in the route distribution. I think that could be kind of interesting and fun, especially with how the Bills went six offensive linemen a bunch this past year using Bobby Hart. So I like that idea. And even if someone beats out Spencer Brown, I mean, granted, unless it's a rookie, I don't think that's necessarily the end of the road, but I think the best thing for this team is to bring in competition for that right tackle spot and bring some solidification to the offensive line there. Oh, appreciate you. Awesome comment. Coach Chapman says, that's why I watch you, Ant. You're on point and you look at the full picture. You're not a narrative guy. I am not a narrative guy. I appreciate you recognizing that. Thank you very much. Silas coming in again with the super chat. Thank you very much. I appreciate you again for your second time tonight, Silas. Silas says, you should do a show and call it Silas Says. It's hard to say 5 times fast, but I like the sound of it. That's beside the point. Let me continue. Silas says, I feel for Brown not getting the reps and time he needs. We have no time to wait for him or Dorsey to get ready. We're wasting Micah, Diggs, and Vaughn. And so that's the piece, right? The timeline of having someone who has a high ceiling but being a project versus what they can contribute on their road to reaching that ceiling, right? So if someone tells you that Spencer Brown is going to be an all-pro in 2025 or even 2024, like when you drafted him, right? They tell you, hey, 3 or 4 years from now, this dude's going to be an all-pro. And you're like, wow, that's awesome. That's all that, because that is awesome. But you have to think about the other piece. Okay, what does he look like in year 1 and year 2 or year 3 or year 4? If he's going to be an all-pro in year 4, that's fantastic. But what does he look like in the years leading up to it? How green does he still look? How raw does he still look? And again, the experience piece and the reps piece that has been mitigated because of his injuries is something that has not helped him. But I think when you get down to the brass tacks of it, Silas, I think you're spot on. It's tough because this is a business and you're trying to win a championship. You don't have time to wait for Spencer Brown to hit his ceiling. You don't have the luxury of being like, you know what, we'll bring him along this year. And, hopefully he learns on the job. This is a championship team. You can't have mercurial performances like that at a primary premium position grouping in the offensive line, but especially at tackle, especially when your quarterback is Josh Allen, and especially given the nature of this offense. So yeah, very fair. Andrew says, would you expect to pick inside and outside? I'll be honest, I don't know what to expect anymore. I really thought the Bills were going to draft Creed Humphrey 2 years ago. I think a lot of the world did. They did not. I really, really thought. So even with the Creed Humphrey pick, I thought they would, but the thing that held me back a little bit was I didn't know how he would transition to guard. And with Mitch Morse still being there, I was like, okay, maybe he's more center than he is guard flexibility. And so they didn't draft Creed Humphrey. Okay, I understand that. But last year, I really thought they were going to take Parham from Memphis in the 3rd round when they ended up taking Terrell Bernard, and Parham got taken by the Raiders literally the next pick after Bernard. I just thought everything lined up. They needed youth on the offensive line. They needed depth. They needed some reinforcement for 2022, but also bigger picture, long-term future pipeline development. I thought Parham ticked all those boxes. I literally thought that was like going to be the pick. We were doing the live draft show and I was like, oh, it's going to be Parham. Like in my head, I was just already seeing it and they went in a different direction. I would like a pick inside and outside. I think you need to raise the floor for 2023 for this Bills offensive line, but you also need like to get pieces into the pipeline. Mitch Morse had another concussion this year. What does his long-term outlook look like? You already need someone at left guard. Spencer Brown has been wishy-washy at right tackle. So, like, are you in the need of, 3 starting offensive lineman pieces next year or the year after? Or, what does that trajectory look like for all these guys? And do you have to bring in high priority free agents? Are you trying to plug them in with real starters, or do you want to draft them and bring them in? I would like multiple picks on the offensive line in this draft in some capacity, some shape or form, preferably early. Again, I think there's multiple options in the first round and the back end of the first round that I think can start for you on day one at right tackle and left guard or right guard, depending on who you're grabbing. And again, I think that helps you for 2023, but also beyond. If you get a good dude who can perform and win the job as a rookie in 2023 and then has the ceiling to go forward. So I would love to see that piece. Oh, sorry, RJ. He says, we don't talk about Creed Humphrey or Dylan Parham. You're right. My fault. I'm sorry. Silas says, every time I think about the Bernard pick, I get a stomach ache. I think what's even more, and I don't want to get too off topic, but I think what's even more frustrating with the Bernard pick is they make the Bernard pick at linebacker, right? And so now it's very hard to replace Tremaine Edmunds, given his skill set and his processing. And he's a unicorn in many ways. We all know this. Like, I don't want to dive too much into Tremaine Edmunds, but it's hard to replace somebody of his ilk and his caliber. But knowing they drafted a linebacker in the 3rd round who isn't to the level of, well, if they lose Tremaine Edmunds, they can just plug in this guy going into year 2. Like, that's not even in the cards right now, seemingly, for the Buffalo Bills. So knowing they took a guy that was kind of basically a special teamer and looks to be a special teamer again in year 2, knowing that you took that person over a potential premium position reinforcement on the offensive line gets me even further. That's what really hurts me. Not only did you not get Parham, but you took a guy at a position who seemingly can't fill in for a guy who may potentially be leaving at that position. And again, I don't think it's a like for like fit, but then that speaks to the piece of why did you draft him and bring him in? I don't want to get too off topic, but yeah, it's less than ideal. Let's bring up another graphic for you folks. Center. This one's a positive one for Mitch Morse. So there were 40 centers with at least 20% of pass protection snaps in 2022. Corey Linsley for the Chargers, phenomenal year. A score of 99.4 in overall pass protection snaps. And then if you look to the right, Corey Linsley was also first in true pass sets for centers with a score of 98.9. So a great year for him. But out of those 40 centers with at least 20% of pass protection snaps, Mitch Morse was tied for 22nd with a score of 97.9. So basically in the top half. But when you look at, this is a huge piece, right? The next one. So of the 206 offensive linemen, so this is everybody, much like we did with the Spencer Brown numbers earlier, because I wanted to show how bad it was. Here I want to show how good it is from Morse. So of the 206 offensive linemen with at least 20% of pass protection snaps, so centers, guards, tackles, Morse was tied for 21st in pass block efficiency in true pass sets and 11th among centers. Again, I'm going to keep saying that those true pass sets are the ones without play action, without a screen, without a rollout, with time to throw between 2 and 4 seconds, and with more than a 3-man rush. So your more traditional guys are pinning their ears back and coming after you. You're just executing, a half slide or a man blocking scheme or full slide, whatever have you, and you're going one-on-one, right? And you're eliminating some of those variables. So of the 206 offensive linemen with at least 20% of pass pro snaps in that true pass set category, Morse was tied for 21st in pass blocking efficiency, and he was 11th amongst centers. That's huge, and that's a good piece. That's a stabilizing force. And he did this while being banged up a little bit himself. I still think he's one of the best movement centers in football. His ability to pull, his ability to get out in space, his ability to, hit his pop set ability, his ability to feign a pull and turn that into pass protection. He's extremely heady. I'm still a big fan of Mitch Morse, and he had several standout, advanced metric numbers here. But what's also a key point is as well, and Coach Chapman mentioned it earlier, your performance is still somewhat tied to who is playing next to you. So even with the struggles of Rodger Saffold and the struggles of Ryan Bates, again, you have to take that into account, right? And I'm not saying Ryan Bates struggled this year, but I'm saying when he did, right? If you're having inconsistencies at both guard spots, or at even just one, that's going to impact your center. And so even with the poor performance of Rodger Saffold at times and some, of the lapses for Ryan Bates, Mitch Morse still had a really good year, again, for the Buffalo Bills. And the advanced metrics speak to it, and the tape speaks to it as well. That's a piece that I want to continue to drill home, that Mitch Morse is still a very good piece, still a very functional piece for this offensive line. And once again, had another good year. Oh, comment here from Coach Chapman. Do you think Ryan Bates can be a future starter at center? I'm nervous about Morse and concussions. I am as well about Morse with the concussions. I'm still used to like things in the 90s when, all of a sudden Pat LaFontaine had to retire and wasn't the same, and Eric Lindros wasn't the same, and some guys just get those concussions and they're never right again. I know that's hockey and not necessarily football, but once you get the first one and it's really bad, you are vulnerable to them for forever. It's like when you dislocate your shoulder. Once it pops out once, you're susceptible to it popping out at any point going forward. So I am nervous. I am nervous about Mitch Morse's future because of the concussions. Again, not just from a Bill standpoint, but just from like a concussions, that's no joke. And CTE is no joke. And a bruised brain and what can happen to you from a human standpoint. I worry about Mitch Morse. Myself and Eric Turner had him on the film room this past offseason, and he was a gem. He's a gem on the field, but he's such a good dude off of it. Like, we were talking offline, and it was just awesome talking ball with him and chopping it up with him. And then how he actually engaged with us in the episode was even better. He's a real good dude, both on and off the field. And so I worry about his concussion piece from just his life standpoint. But yeah, then obviously if you're just looking at the brass tacks of it, how does that affect him for the Buffalo Bills? When does he decide to potentially retire? Does he suffer one more concussion and it's his last type of deal? And then all of a sudden it's like, okay, who do you plug in? I think Bates can function at center. Honestly, what I really like about Ryan Bates is that I think he can be sufficient at both center and guard. I'm fine with it either way. I just think wherever you go, if Bates is your guard, I think you need to get yourself a legitimate center. If Bates is your center, I think you need to get yourself a legitimate guard. Either way, but I'm comfortable with Bates at either or center or guard. Oh, man. Rich says, yes, Ant, why does this team refuse to get the line moving? I don't know if it's a lack of faith or if it's a design piece. This year they saw more success in the zone run scheme towards the end of the year, especially with James Cook. So I think that played a role in terms of not seeing as much movement in terms of the pin and pulls and counter and power and pulling guards and pulling tackles, but they did, or pulling centers, I should say, but they did pull tackles to a decent degree. They used that tackle wrap play. We saw a lot. It's called often referred to as dart. We saw Spencer Brown using it. We saw Dion Dawkins using it. Depending on the front, tackle from the backside will loop all the way around and pull and wrap around the opposite side tackle, or will, wrap and come from their spot and then wrap in between the opposite guard and tackle. We saw them use that a bunch. I think we saw potentially less of it, or you think we saw less of it because they used more zone run scheme down the stretch, especially as James Cook falling apart. I'm still back in Mobile mentally. That was a hell of a week. The offense shifted a bit in terms of their run game scheme and philosophy and ideology this year. So I think you saw more zone run scheme, which was less, seemed like less offensive line movement because, you have less pin and pulls, less power, all that kind of stuff, especially in juxtaposition with what we saw for the back end of 2021 and into the playoffs, where it was a ton of gap. You were seeing, Ryan Bates pulling from the left guard. They were running 21 personnel, and you were seeing Bates and Gilliam both pulling. You were getting a lot of GT counter. You were seeing Mitch Morse pulling left and right on pin and pulls. So I think a shift in run scheme a little bit, combined with it being a new offensive coordinator, is maybe why you saw less movement. But I still think they did get a decent amount of movement from their offensive line. And also, again, you still need movement in the zone scheme, right? Your ability to function at the double team and then be able to climb to the second level. I think that's one of Spencer Brown's strengths that he's really been able to do. His ability to get to the second level and seal off linebackers and off-ball dudes has been a real strong suit of his. It's just been inconsistency in a lot of other areas. Let's go to some other numbers for this Bills offensive line. So the graphics I was showing earlier were from PFF. So let's go to another company that uses advanced metrics. We're going to go to Sports Info Solutions because, again, I wanted to combine both pieces. So I gave you all those PFF efficiency scores for the offensive line from an individual perspective. As a group, one last piece from PFF. As an entire offensive line, the Bills were ranked 20th with an efficiency and pass blocking score of 84.8. So again, kind of middling, just slightly below average as a group. And I think that makes sense given where we saw Spencer Brown ranked and where we saw, especially Spencer Brown, but even Rodger Saffold to a degree. But again, they ranked 20th. So 16th would be middle of the pack. They're just below that. Again, I think that speaks to what this group is. Like I mentioned in the beginning, they're middling to slightly below middling. They're average to below average on the whole. But per SIS, let's take a look at some pieces. So overall, pass blocking and run blocking combined per Sports Info Solutions, the Buffalo Bills had the 5th lowest blown blocks overall. That's between the pass and the run. For those who don't know, a blown block for SIS is anytime a blocker does not successfully block the defender they attempted to engage with, and as a result, gives that defender an opportunity to negatively affect the play. So they were 5th overall in blown blocks. A lot of this was tied to how low they were in blown blocks for the run. So if you're looking at the run perspective, they had the least blown blocks in total when it came to run blocking per SIS. Now, some of this is a function of how much they ran the ball. They were one of the league leaders in throwing the football. So obviously, if you're running the ball less, you have less of an opportunity to blow a block. You have less of an opportunity to draw a hold. So it's a pure volume standpoint, right? And then the opposite is true for pass protection. If you're passing the ball more, the odds of you blowing a block in pass protection or getting a hold in pass protection are higher just because you're seeing increased reps there. So it's going to happen at some point. But again, looking at this group overall, pass blocking or pass protection and run blocking, 5th lowest blown blocks overall, 25th in blown block percentage overall, and the 4th most holds overall. So high in the hold category. If you're looking just at pass protection, again, what do we talk about? Average to below average or middling or slightly below. They had the 14th most blown blocks in pass protection. So again, middling. They were 15th in blown block percentage in pass protection. So again, middling. They were tied for the most holds in pass protection, which is not middling. That's bad. That's high. But again, I'm not giving them a pass, but it does make sense. If you are a higher volume passing team, you are probably going to have more holds because you have more opportunities to hold because, again, you are passing so much. If you're looking at the run game, right? Like I mentioned earlier, the least amount of blown blocks in the run game, the 4th lowest blown block percentage in run blocking, and they were 21st in holds in run blocking. So again, 21st being good because they're not towards the top. 4th most holds in pass protection, 21st for run blocking. So a big discrepancy there. So when you're looking at, PFF and SIS, again, that's why I wanted to pull both of these, multiple advanced metrics sites to be able to put a full picture together. In addition to having the film plus advanced metrics, I like the marriage of everything. I like full picture. I like context. I like having as many puzzle pieces as possible and putting those together to again, put the full picture together for you folks and for myself. So with both PFF and SIS, it's clear the Bills have vulnerabilities on the offensive line, especially when you look at it from an individual standpoint, position by position. But they are not holistically awful. They are middling to below middling in several offensive metrics when you look at them as a group. And like I mentioned earlier, the issue has been the mercurial performance across the offensive line on the whole, when you average them out, the group as a unit is average to below average at times, and sometimes they function above average. The problem has been, like I mentioned earlier, one, being average to below average isn't necessarily ideal, but more importantly, the Bills O-line has shuffled or rotated the role of who's going to be the vulnerable one from play to play. I'm sure if you're just thinking in your head right now, how dare you, Nikki? Don't come in here and say that Saffold was a Pro Bowler, though. You know what you're doing. I see the laughing emojis. How dare you? When you think about this Bills offensive line, their performance this year, even if there's someone you really like I love Mitch Morse, right? I can immediately think of a couple reps off the top of my head where he just got blown up and got worked, right? Which happens from time to time. But if you think about this offensive line individually, you can literally go game to game where, and again, this isn't unique to the Bills, but I feel like it happened to them more often than some other teams, where you can look and just see, oh, okay, I remember when Spencer Brown got beat in like what felt like half a second. Oh, I remember when that happened to Bates. I remember when that happened to Morse. I remember when that happened to Saffold. I remember when that happened to Dawkins. And it's just the pendulum swinging, and you don't know who it's going to be, and you don't know where it's going to come from. Again, like one snap, Spencer Brown gets beat quickly. On another, it's Saffold. Then it's Bates. Then it's Dawkins. Then it's Morse. There's no one player getting beat rep after rep. Yes, you have certain players that get beat more than others, but each share and wear that hat of vulnerability. And again, the analogy I used earlier that Silas was a fan of, it's like if the Bills' offensive line were a dam. There's not one giant hole, but there are several cracks of varying sizes, and you never know which crack is going to leak and how much water they're going to let in and when it's going to leak. But what you do know is that it's going to leak at some point. And sometimes it's going to be one leak at a time. Sometimes two cracks are going to leak at once. Sometimes it's more. Sometimes it'll be none. And that's the biggest piece. It's that variability and level of uncertainty from rep to rep that is a hindrance to the Bills offense. And I also think it's a hindrance to Josh Allen, because you'll see in games, especially ones where he's pressured early, as the game progresses, I don't mean skittish in the sense that he gets like scared and like, skittish like a squirrel, but you can see him start to look to evade or bail from the pocket earlier than he has to, because he does not have faith in the offensive line to execute up front. You saw it several times in the Bengals game. You saw it several times against Miami. Again, you've seen it a bunch throughout this year. He'll see a flash of color. It'll be like the third quarter, and the offensive line has been getting beat a decent amount in the first and second. And again, I don't think necessarily unique to Josh. This has been, the book on quarterbacks, since forever, tale as old as time, song as old as rhyme type stuff. You get pressure on the quarterback early and get into their head, and, you can affect their performance. But when Josh gets pressured early, as the game goes on, anytime he sees a flash, he starts to evade, and he starts to go, you know what, forget it. I'll put it on my shoulders. I'll make a hero play. I'll make a Superman play. I'll take care of it. And that's not sustainable. You need Josh Allen to feel comfortable. You need for him to be able to let plays develop. That's also a huge piece too, I think, in this offense. There were times, not just vertical or down the field or in the deep intermediate. Bill says Beauty and the Beast. Exactly. Tale as old as time, song as old as rhyme. Well done, Bill. If I had a prize, you'd get it. You'd win it. So take solace in that. There were times where there were plays developing maybe on the backside of a read or deep or in the intermediate or deeper intermediate, where there is a route clearing and there is someone who's open, legitimately open. And Allen can't get there because he has to break a tackle in the backfield, or he has to scramble, or he has to evade, or the play is going to be open to the left, but he's getting pressure from the left, so he's got to run to the right, and the play that was developing and going this way, he's going that way, and he's got no chance to get the ball there. That offensive line impacted so much of what was happening offensively. And that's been my big thing for, evaluating this offense as a whole this year. Oh, wow. Donation super chat from Joel. Appreciate you, Joel, for being here and for the super chat. And Joel says, does love the morally good because does God love the morally good because they're morally good, or are they good because God loves them? And he says, Go Bills. I don't know. It's a pretty deep question, but I appreciate the Go Bills. I appreciate you being here, and I appreciate the super chat. Got to bring up every super chat. I appreciate you. The mercurial performance of the offensive line not only affects the run game, not only affects general pass protection, but I think it gets into the head of Josh Allen, and it forces Josh Allen to try and put more onto his shoulders. And then that also affects, I think, the play calling, the effectiveness of the weapons. It's all tied together. I've seen so many thoughts and statements recently about, I think everyone's trying to focus blame on one person or one position group. And for a while it was Ken Dorsey, and then it's been Gabe Davis, and then it was Rodger Saffold, or the offensive line as a whole. Everything is interconnected. The offensive line struggled at times this year. Ken Dorsey could be better. Josh Allen could be better in his decision-making and ball placement. The weapons could be better in terms of their, ability to catch the football and route running and reads and all of the pieces together. There are so many moving pieces and variables on any given play, and they're all connected. And the Bills offense as a whole, not to get too off topic from the offensive line, the problem is they had so many dips in all of those different, interconnecting areas that's the reason they struggled at times, because you need so many things to line up in order to have a successful play or a successful game. And because you have so many moving parts, if one of them fails miserably, that can wreck all of the other moving parts, and the rest of the moving parts is functionality. And that's what we saw at times from Josh Allen, from Ken Dorsey, from some of the weapons, from the offensive line. But we're just focusing here on this offensive line piece. The group has to get better. You need more, again, like I said earlier, you need to reinforce the stability and consistency of this group. You need to reduce the mercurial performances of the offensive line. And like I mentioned, again, overall, they grade out as a middling group, which is fine. But the issue is their performance isn't always middling. So if you're operating here, and for those listening only, I've got my hand at like eye level here, right? Say that's middling. It's not like the Bills, so the Bills finish here, but they're not always riding here. The problem is sometimes they ride real high, way above my head, and it's awesome. Sometimes they ride real low underneath the table and underneath the camera so you can't see. But then because it's on an average and you're taking it for the entire sample size, when it balances out, it comes out to middling. But their performance isn't consistently a middling performance. It's very mercurial. It's very roller coastery. It's very up and down. And it's not across the whole group. I think a lot of that mercurial nature for this offensive line was tied to, again, everyone played a role, but I think it happened to some more than others. I think it happened at right tackle more often than any other position. I think it happened to left guard more often than any other position. And when you're looking at that piece, it's hard to see certain players coming back and just having that spot. I think Spencer Brown was penciled into the right tackle spot this year in year 2. Like I mentioned earlier, I don't think that should be the case in year 3. I think at the very least, you need to bring in somebody to compete with him. In an ideal world, I think you need to bring in somebody who already is penciled in ahead of him. But given his high ceiling, given the injuries he had, I think you could make the case if you want to allow him to battle it out and potentially win that job. And if that's the case, fine, let him battle it. But at the very, 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 very least, you need to make Spencer Brown compete to start at right tackle. He's got to earn it. Iron sharpens iron type of thing. I want to look at some other stats and read some pieces before we get into the film. So keep in mind what I'm about to go through are volume stats. And again, like I mentioned, for example, if we're looking at pressures given up, the more you pass, the more pressures you'll give up in theory. So because the Bills pass a lot, their numbers individually and as a group are somewhat skewed to start. So that's why I led with the efficiency stats. But nonetheless, for some further perspective, Spencer Brown was tied for the 8th most pressures allowed in 2022 amongst all offensive linemen. He was tied for the 5th most amongst all tackles. And then he was tied for the 3rd most in true pass sets amongst all offensive linemen. Rodger Saffold tied for the 6th most pressures amongst all guards, and he was tied for the 15th most pressures allowed amongst all offensive linemen. And then from a true pass set perspective, 6th most pressures allowed in true pass sets amongst all guards. Ryan Bates, 16th most pressures amongst all guards, tied for 17th in true pass sets. Mitch Morse tied for the 14th most pressures. Again, the higher you are, the worse it is. So the lower down you are, the better. So good year for Mitch out of the amount of qualifying centers. Bates, not bad. Dawkins was tied for the 20 most pressures amongst the 133 qualifying tackles. So again, not ideal necessarily for him, but not the worst. The biggest discrepancies you're seeing with what happened with Spencer Brown and again with Rodger Saffold. But again, I wanted to put those, numbers into perspective a little bit with the efficiency pieces. Again, volume numbers can be misleading. If you pass more, the odds of you giving up a pressure are increased because you are passing more. You have more opportunities to not give up a pressure, but you also have more opportunities to give up a pressure. So keep that in mind, but just wanted to put some of those pieces into perspective again. And then one other stat here, Josh Allen's regular season and postseason, of the 40 quarterbacks that had at least 20% of snaps in 2022, he had the 5th most dropbacks under pressure. But again, that's a volume number. So the Bills pass a ton, so he will be pressured more. Patrick Mahomes is in the top tier as well. So if you look at it from a percentage standpoint, he was 15th in percentage of dropbacks under pressure. So out of the 40 qualifying quarterbacks, he had the 15th highest percentage of dropbacks under pressure at 35.3. So basically about 3.5 out of every 10 snaps, he was getting pressured. And then he was 30th out of those 40 QBs in a good way in pressures converted to sacks at 15.4%. So Josh Allen, in large part, is the reason there weren't more sacks. His ability to evade, his ability to break tackles was a significant piece why the Bills didn't give up more sacks and why more negative plays weren't created against this Bills passing attack. But again, like I mentioned, that's not sustainable, 1. And 2, it can lead to him leaving the pocket early when he doesn't need to later in games because he does not feel comfortable in the pocket given what's happened to him in previous games or earlier in the game and all those pieces. So it can be interesting. Now, thank you, Jason. Jason says, make sure you hit the like button so Ant feels the love and reconsiders his Slytherin character arc. Well played. I just think Slytherin's like, if you're going to try and be a great wizard, I understand the whole Gryffindor piece, but the Sorting Hat said it, right? If Harry went to Slytherin, some great things, man. I'm just kind of saying it. And Harry wasn't even that great of a wizard. Not to downplay Harry Potter and get us too off topic, but he wasn't even like the best wizard. He was just the chosen one because he got marked. So imagine what he could have done in Slytherin, right? That's how great of a house they are, that they make like kind of average dudes bounce up towards the top. That's some good development. They know how to coach them up in Slytherin. But I appreciate you, Jason. Now, let's take a look at some film. I didn't want to go too hard into the film. Again, I didn't want to make this a snuff film. I didn't want to point out like, yo, here's all these terrible plays. Bill says, could the hat be wrong? It's fair. Jason says, no hate. I went Slytherin. Kids annoy me, and I hate pretending to be nice to my classmates when they all annoy me. This is fantastic. I'm loving all the Harry Potter talk. We're going to go to some film. Now, again, I didn't want to we all know the struggles. Again, like I mentioned, I think a lot of us, even if you're not watching the All-22, if you're just thinking about struggles from the Bills offensive line, there's a bunch of plays that are readily available in your brain. So I didn't want to just pull out a ton and just make it seem like the Bills offensive line is awful, awful, awful and really dump on everybody. Because there was some good mixed with the bad, but I wanted to bring in some pieces that, again, just kind of showcase a little bit what the offensive line looked like at times for this Buffalo Bills offense. Now, let's share my screen here for you folks. Let's grab this first play here. So this first play is from the game against the Cincinnati Bengals. If we're going to make a Harry Potter reference, I think this game might be like the game that should not be named, kind of like you're not supposed to say Voldemort in the first couple of books, but nonetheless, here we are. So I've got Dion Dawkins highlighted up top. This is a 3-man rush from the Cincinnati Bengals. This is early in the game. If you can see here on the bottom a little bit, this is the play highlighted here. This is the first quarter. I actually believe, yes, this is the second drive. Second drive, third quarter, Bengals bring a 3-man rush. Trey Hendrickson is the one opposite of Dion Dawkins. And Dion Dawkins is one of the better offensive linemen for the Buffalo Bills. I think he's an above average left tackle. I think if he is your left tackle, you're doing okay. I don't think he's a stud. I don't think he's amazing. I also don't think he's a vulnerability, and I don't think he's deficient. But he will have reps like this from time to time, especially against top tier talent, which again, a lot of offensive linemen can. Trey Hendrickson is a beast. He's a monster. But you would like to see a little bit more from Dion on this rep. So again, there's Dion highlighted with the yellow arrow there. Motion, snap, 3-man rush. You have the numbers advantage. You've got 5 on 3. And even Devin Singletary, who I'll highlight here. Oh, not highlight there. The squiggle. There it is. Devin Singletary highlighted there. That's a horrible circle by me. Apologies. Devin Singletary highlighted there. He doesn't even release right away because of the look the Bengals are giving. So the Bengals are showing 5 at the line of scrimmage. So Singletary's there as part of that check to kind of help out. So you've got 5 on the offensive line plus Devin Singletary. So you've kind of got 6, but at the very least 5 against 3. And it doesn't matter because Dawkins gets beat right around the arc and Allen gets popped. And this is another one, right, where I don't know what, if Allen, this defender, I think can see that Allen's about to get popped by Hendrickson. But if you watch, Isaiah McKenzie starts to clear and Allen just can't get there because he gets nailed. And it's just almost, again, it's almost instantaneous. And then he throws the ball away, gets some chicanery. But you watch it from this perspective again. Here's Dion Dawkins at your left tackle spot, but right from your current vantage point. And I play it in real time, just right around the arc. It's a good move and a good rush by Trey Hendrickson. We'll watch it in slow-mo. Watch. Dawkins extends first and sticks his hands out. Watch. Oof. Want to see, make sure you can see it. Watch Trey Hendrickson's right arm swat Dion Dawkins' left hand right here. So there goes Dion Dawkins' hand. Watch the swipe come. Bang. Immediately swats it down and then dips and rips through. Creates a soft edge, runs through that shoulder. Bang. But again, that's one for Doc, right? Like, you're one of the better guys. You've had struggles at your other pieces. This is what I'm talking about, that vulnerability hat. Like, everyone has worn it at some time or in some way at one point or another in this season for the Buffalo Bills. It's not just unique to Spencer Brown or Rodger Saffold. Let's move on to another play. Fun times. Let's move on to one for Rodger Saffold. I think this is one that is stuck in a ton of people's heads. This is one where Saffold, I timed it. I think he gets beaten about 1.1 seconds when I was looking at it from the sideline angle back after I did the film breakdown with Eric in the film for this game. But I have Saffold highlighted there. I'll play it in real time. It just bang. It's just so fast. Bang. There's no, and this is part of it too. So Saffold would use these aggressive sets at times. He did it against Miami at multiple points in the second regular season matchup, the Saturday night game in the snow. And sometimes it worked, and sometimes he would whiff horribly. And he's against DJ Reader on this one, and DJ Reader is sick. Like, they've got a good defensive line from a starter perspective, and they also reinforced a bit with their depth. But you've got Trey Hendrickson and Reader and Hill and Hubbard, and then you've got a young guy like Osai and some other defensive interior pieces that they work through. But this is just wild. Like, I know Reader is real good, but you're just beat almost instantly. And if you watch the form, he's leaning too far over his feet. He's not set in his base. He's got no stability with that left foot, and he just gets a quick arm over. And if you look at it's the balance after the fact, right? Like, when he gets that quick arm over, watch how much he stumbles because he's that much off kilter and he's that much off balance. Here's Saffold right here. You watch it from this angle, it's just bad. Like, and this isn't where you want to be, like in no man's land, right? And even despite that, right? Look what happens on this play. Josh Allen is being a unicorn. Like, there's no reason why this play should be a positive. He's dead to rights. He escapes again, kind of pump fakes a little, breaks a tackle, gets forward, gets hit, ball comes out, but he was down by contact. Like, there's no reason this should even be a positive. So imagine what Josh Allen can do if he doesn't have to do this all the time. Like, that would be a fun idea. That would be a novel concept. Let's look at a Ryan Bates play for this game. Here's Ryan Bates highlighted on this one at right guard. This time he's matched up against BJ Hill, Bengals interior defender. Not as quick as Saffold, but watch, gets hit there. Oof, violent push pull, gets turned around. Like, it's not good when your back is facing the line of scrimmage and your front is facing the quarterback. Like, watch Bates just get turned quickly. Not great. And then on the other side, let's watch Dion Dawkins, right? Let's watch Dawkins battle against Joseph Asai. Good job from Dion Dawkins. Escorts his man around the edge. Even Spencer Brown on the right side. Let's look at Spencer Brown on the right tackle. This dude falls down, but he takes advantage. Boom. But you have a good rep on the backside from Dion Dawkins. Granted, it's against a rookie. But again, look at, you've got a good double team here. You've got Dawkins executing here. You've got a man who falls down and Brown takes him out. So 4 of your 5 offensive linemen are executing. And it doesn't matter because one of your guys gets beat so bad. And then Josh Allen still makes a play. Ridiculous. I also like this from the sideline angle too. Watch Khalil Shakir work through Mike Hilton in the slot. I'll go to here in case people can't see it. Here's Shakir on Mike Hilton. Watch Shakir work through the contact right here. Shed. They keep going across. Allen breaks the tackle, fires. Awesome. Unicorn play. Not easy, but also not sustainable and not to be expected for your quarterback. Again, this is the example, right? Not Josh Allen making the play, which is special and fantastic, but 4 of your 5 offensive linemen are fine and executing well, I would say. And all it takes is one. All it takes is that one crack in the dam to be a significant leak. And you got water everywhere. It just takes that one. It doesn't have to be all the cracks. It doesn't have to be a huge hole all the time in the same spot. It just takes one. And on this play, this was the one. But Josh made a play out of it. So great job by Josh. But again, hard to expect that or ask that of someone play after play, game after game. And that's what was happening too much with Josh Allen this year and even last year to a degree. I want to show a Spencer Brown clip here. This one is going to be from the second regular season game against the Miami Dolphins. This one is the turnover for the Buffalo Bills. Josh Allen gets sacked and we get a fumble here. So I've got Spencer Brown highlighted there at right tackle. And again, it's not just getting beat. It's how quickly it happens. Watching in real time, Phillips just clears him immediately. Now Allen steps up. Phillips has to run the whole arc, which isn't bad. It's not the worst thing in the world, right? This isn't a horrible rep from Brown. You know, at the very least, he prevents Phillips from flattening, right? You know, he keeps pushing him around that arc, which is somewhat of a positive. Like, again, I know Brown gets beat here and Phillips gets the sack, but right here he's beat, right? Phillips could, and ideally he wants to flatten and be able to come right down the line in some way, or he wants to maybe, you know, hit the arc here and then be able to retrace and come back through. But Brown does a good job of being able to get onto his shoulder a bit and push him upfield. But the issue is, you know, he just got beat. And so you get a sack. Again, from a coverage standpoint, this is where coverage is married with pass rush. Miami does a good job on the back end from a coverage standpoint, and Josh Allen has nowhere to go with the ball. Technically, and I want it on this one, he's got Cole Beasley. Again, I don't want to break down the play too much. He's got Beasley. Throw Cole Beasley the ball, but I think this is, again, at this point in the game, he'd been getting some pressure. He'd been getting roughed up a little bit. I got to fix my camera there. He'd been getting roughed up a bit. So I think he gets a little skittish, tries to evade early, ends up working into Phillips' favor. Watch it from the end zone angle. Again, not the worst for Spencer Brown because he prevents Phillips from flattening, but you just see he reaches and just gets swiped, but then does a decent job of recovering. Forces Phillips to run the full arc, gives Josh a chance, but pass rush married with coverage. And you see what happens on the back end. Sack, fumble, Dolphins ball. I didn't want to grab a complete horrible one for Spencer Brown, and there were some readily available. You know, I went through the advanced metrics for him, and we saw the struggles and with the graphics I brought up, and I read some others, and you know, it is what it is for this offensive line. I think a lot of this conversation in this episode and going forward is centered around the right tackle position and the guard position, whether it's left guard, right guard, whatever you want to do with Ryan Bates. He gives you some flexibility, but the Bills need an upgrade at right tackle for me. I would like to see someone supplant Spencer Brown as the starting right tackle in 2023. But like I said, at the very least, you need to bring in competition for him. In a perfect world, you don't have to bring in anybody. And a healthy offseason combined with a full offseason with Aaron Cromer and, maybe the motivation to be better, and Spencer Brown stabilizes a bit and we get less roller coaster and we get more consistency. Again, I'm not even asking or expecting top 10 right tackle production, right? Just level out. I'll even take a dip in the high highs if it means he just raises the floor. That would be swell, and that would be grand. Just more consistency, less variability and variance from play to play, drive to drive, rep to rep. I think you need that at right tackle. And then left guard, I know Saffold made the Pro Bowl, as the joke was made earlier, but they need better pass protection out of that left guard spot, whether on tape or with the efficiency metrics from SIS or from PFF, or even you want to look at some of the volume standpoints. Again, Saffold had a rough year. However you slice it, they need more stability at the left guard position. Some of the names who I like, again, I don't want to make it too draft focused. Silas coming in, and he's already given one. Yeah, Darnell Wright. I liked coming into the Senior Bowl last week, and then I got to see him up close and in person. And this is funny from Roy. Roy says, I want 5 All-Pro O-linemen. Damn it. Well, that's what everybody wants. Well done. Well done. I like Darnell Wright coming into the Senior Bowl last week. And then I got to see him perform every day. He had some rough reps. You saw some a bit of some over aggressiveness, or he was too eager at times, and got his hands and his upper body too far in front of his feet, mainly in run blocking reps in practice. And then a pass pro rep where he got beat by Lonnie Phelps in the Senior Bowl. But I like Darnell Wright a lot, especially after, you watch the tape and you see him go toe to toe against Will Anderson from Alabama, who I know people are nitpicking Anderson a bit more, which I think happens when you're that good the year before and then you stay in college and you come out the next year. At some point, like, you're just going to hit like diminishing returns and people are just going to pick apart everything you have. Will Anderson is top tier blue chip. He's my number 1 prospect for this draft. He is as pro ready comes. And Darnell Wright and him had a battle rep after rep. And I think on the whole, Darnell Wright struggled at times. I wouldn't say struggled at times, but he got beat by Anderson and he got beat by a couple other guys from Bama. But on the whole, he had a really good day against Bama in the run and in the pass. And you see somebody like that, and I think that's tremendously encouraging. So Darnell Wright is right now my ideal round 1 guy. Again, this is also very, 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 very early. We don't know what the Bills are going to do in free agency or potential trades or how draft boards are going to shake out. We got to see what happens at the combine and pro days and all that stuff. But yes, Darnell Wright is up there on that board for me. Bills are electric coming through with the comment here saying maybe Jalen Duncan from Maryland or Matthew Bergeron in the bottom of the second. Bergeron had a good week. I think what's nice with Bergeron is he gives you some guard tackle flexibility. So if you want to kick him in at guard, you can. If you want to put him in at tackle, you can. He was getting work at left tackle and left guard a lot during the Senior Bowl, which is nice. He had a couple rough reps at times, but again, I don't think that's unique to him. Again, you got the best of the best competing against one another. I thought on the whole in the week, he showed a lot of promise, especially at that size and the athleticism and the way he moves. I think he's somebody who could grow into a quality starter for you. I think he offers you a fine enough floor in 2023, but somebody who could potentially grow into the position. Again, depending on if you want to put him at guard or if you want to put him at tackle. And he is a little rough around the edges at times, but again, you smooth those out and you bank on. I don't think he's as raw as Spencer Brown was coming out. The issue that I do have, though, is I don't want to get too wishy-washy with, like, is he a guard? Is he a tackle? I don't think it's a Cody Ford situation, someone who I thought was more guard than anything and should have been a guard from day one. But I think he offers you guard tackle flexibility, which is nice given the status and state of the Bills' offensive line and questions going forward. So if you have somebody with that versatility, I think that might be nice. Jalen Duncan had some good reps, more so on day one on that Tuesday. I have to watch his tape. Same thing with Bergeron. I have to watch Bergeron's game tape from this year. I've seen games, like broadcast games for both guys, but I got to really dig into the tape. Darnell Wright has been my main tackle, tape study focus as of now. There's a lot of opportunity in the draft. I know I think someone threw it out there already of Broderick Jones falling to 27. Oh, yeah, it was also you, Bills. Are Alexa saying Broderick Jones falls to pick 27. I don't know why my camera keeps doing that to me in this episode. Man, crazy. Broderick Jones, tackle from Georgia. I have to watch his tape. But from what I've gathered from the year, I feel like him and Paris Johnson are tackle 1 and 2. Again, but things can change. We'll see what happens at the combine. We'll see what happens in pro days. I think any way you slice it, there is a good opportunity for the Buffalo Bills to address offensive line at the end of the first round with someone of legitimate quality who can start for you in 2023 and who also offers you a pretty good ceiling going forward. So there is hope. If the Bills need to address the offensive line in the draft, I think there are options on day 1. I think there are plenty of options on day 2. Lord help us if the Bills do not address offensive line this offseason or early in the draft, if they don't in free agency. The draft is the ideal way for me for the offensive line, just given the nature of this grouping. If they just sign some vets and they get better for 2023, I'm all for that. But you need to start looking at the long-term viability of this group. And I think there are questions long-term, like, is Spencer Brown a long-term piece? What does Mitch Morse look like? What are you doing at left guard? Like, where is Ryan Bates going and slotted? So anything you can do to kind of remove some of those variables and remove some of those questions, I think will help for this group. Coach Chapman, I think you're talking about I'm guessing Jarrett Patterson from Notre Dame. Eric Turner's a big fan of his. He had a good week, especially in the beginning, especially on day 1. I would like to see his game tape. I got to dive into him fully. I know Eric Turner also, did a breakdown of him before the Senior Bowl and was a fan of his game on tape. But he's somebody I'm intrigued with as well. Again, somebody who offers you that versatility and athleticism on the inside. There's a lot of options. Honestly, there's a bunch. And again, into this theme of much like there have been in similar years, Silas coming through with some more names, So Wright, Voorhees from USC, Whippler, the center from Ohio State. Oh, and then he wants Michael Wilson, wide receiver from Stanford, and Jaden Reed, wide receiver from Michigan State. Yeah, there's opportunity for this offensive line to be addressed. We'll see what they do in free agency. Again, it's not a loaded market, which doesn't bode well for the Buffalo Bills because the dudes that are available are probably going to get more money thrown at them than they should potentially. Who knows? Maybe not though, but there are opportunities in free agency. I don't think there's as many realistic combined with quality options as there are in the draft. Granted, the draft carries more variables because, none of these dudes have seen an NFL snap yet. So even the highest of prospects and, the most sure of prospects that you have coming out, we still have no idea. There's still that level of variability and that semblance of the unknown that exists with all the prospects. But I think there is hope for this draft and from an offensive line perspective, in addition to some other positions, which we're going to be diving into all offseason with the Skies coverage. As we move forward here on the show throughout the offseason, I'm going to be taking a look at some more position groupings for the Buffalo Bills and just talking about, again, what they were in 2022, pros and cons, what needs to happen going forward, and then shining that focus each episode as well, into the draft and free agency, but before fully going into full free agency and draft mode, once the combine starts to roll around as we push forward in these next several months. One more shout out for the sponsor here in this episode, One Pie Pizza. I don't just say it because they sponsor the show. They are the best pizza in Buffalo, New York. The reason they are the sponsor for the show is because I think their pizza is the best in Buffalo, New York. Love it. Sweet sauce pie, cup and char pepperoni, great cheese to sauce ratio, great dough and crust. It all just marries perfectly together, and they make their own homemade blue cheese. And as I mention all the time, like, they're good people. My interactions with them have always been A1. And then you look at all the initiatives and drives they do for the community, whether it's partnering with Roswell, whether it's partnering with the SPCA, partnering with the Alzheimer's Foundation, Toys for Tots and their drives for the holidays. Like, they just tick so many boxes from a humanity standpoint, a community standpoint. And on top of that, they make something that is absolutely delicious. I'm probably going to end up getting some on the back end of this week. I'm very excited for some One Pie Pizza. Again, the online menu can be found in the episode show notes. Get yourself some One Pie Pizza. Tell them Disguised Coverage sent you. There's also a pizza that's there that's named after the show. It's called Disguised Coverage, Cover One Allen Goat, which Oh, it's just, I don't even want, go look at the menu. I don't want to do it any injustice by describing what it is. I've had it. It's fantastic. Go get yourself some. Shout out to the folks at One Pie Pizza. Throwing out the banner here for Toodles, folks, because we're starting to wind down here on this episode. Before if you see this and you're like, oh, that's my cue to leave, please don't leave yet if you haven't dropped a like. Likes, like I mentioned, are the lifeblood of these streams. They go a long way towards helping myself and the entire team to track and trend in front of more eyes. So please, 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 and thank you. Drop a like on this video if you would be so kind. If you are on one of the podcasting apps or platforms, please leave a rating. Please leave a review. Especially if it's genuine with real feedback. I'm always, looking to get better and improve myself and the show and anything and everything. So any type of feedback along with the ratings and reviews are tremendously helpful for myself and this team and this show. Word of mouth is always good. If you enjoyed this show, if you enjoy this show regularly, or you enjoyed this episode, please tell your family and friends and loved ones and anyone that'll hear. Tell them about this show. Shout it from the rooftops, the mountaintops, building tops, helicopters. Get a megaphone, walk out to your street in the middle of the night and just start shouting about this show and tell everybody how great it is. Or if you thought the show was terrible, that's fine. Tell your enemies about the show and try and ruin their day by making them watch this show. Anyway, you slice it. I appreciate you folks more than you will possibly know. Thank you very much to everybody who rode with me live here on this episode. The engagement was good. The back and forth was good. The questions, the thoughts, the comments, concerns, the engagement with one another. Thank you very much, Silas. One, for being here, like I mentioned, but also for both of your super chats. I really appreciate you. And, moving the conversation forward. And Silas, thank you very much again for dropping another super chat. And Silas says there's only 15 likes. Tighten up, people. Drop a like, folks. That really hurts my heart that there's only 15 likes. I hope we can get to more. I hope by the time I look at this episode, in like 15, 20 minutes from now, we're pushing closer to at least 50 and getting towards those hundreds. I appreciate you, Silas. Thank you very much for shouting for that. And I appreciate all the kind words from everybody thanking me for the show and everything like that. I appreciate you folks. I know it's the slow time for the offseason. And I know, football fans or Bills fans, especially with this being Super Bowl week, you're still kind of checked out on the Bills or football in general. So for those of you who rode with me live, thank you very much for being here. For those of you who didn't ride with me live, whether here on YouTube or any one of the podcasting apps or platforms, thank you very much for your post-live view, listen, download, whatever have you. I appreciate any and all forms of support in whichever way, shape, and form they come in. We're officially in off-season mode here on this show, and I've said it on Twitter. I've said it a couple times on the show and throughout the Cover One, universe. This offseason is super important for the Buffalo Bills. They have a lot of significant decisions to make on both sides of the ball, from a roster standpoint, from a scheme standpoint, that will decide in a big way who they are in 2023 and beyond. So this offseason isn't just about 2023. This offseason, I think, will legitimately be very, very formative for who the Buffalo Bills are in 2024, 25, and beyond. Like, this sets the table for a lot of what we're going to see, not just for 2023, but the next several years after. So bang it here for Disguise Coverage live every Wednesday at 7 p.m. throughout this offseason. I will have you folks covered with the in-depth knowledge and X's and O's and scheme and evaluation that you need as a Buffalo Bills fan or fan of football in general. Again, as we start to move forward and get closer into the end of February and March, we will start to bring more of a free agent focus and then a draft focus and evaluation, fits and schemes and pieces, and really breaking down who can come in and help this team, why, and all of those pieces. So yeah, excited to get into that piece, even though I know we all want the Bills to be playing in the Super Bowl this weekend, but it's not happening. We'll see what happens this offseason and going forward. Again, I appreciate all you folks. Enjoy your evening. Enjoy the rest of your week. Be kind to one another. Take care of one another. I hope you and your family and friends and loved ones are all doing well and staying safe. Thank you again for any and every ounce of support. I hope you all, follow in Silas's footsteps and drop some more likes. Please, it makes me legitimately sad that there's not more likes, but to each their own. I just hope you folks drop some more likes. Thank you, folks. Also, in case anybody's wondering, I was in Mobile last week. I forgot to take the big tree down and didn't really think about it. The wife did, some red garland and hearts for Valentine's Day. But there will be some tree updates come next week. So stay tuned for that. I know everybody's been thinking about that. I know you're all clamoring and murmuring about it. So I just wanted to address that. Thank you, folks. I will see you next week for another episode of Disguise Coverage. And as always, go Bills.